Sweet, eternal balance of all that is good, true, and beautiful, friends. I am graced today to bring back a friend and a master of astrology, Michael Wann. Michael is the creator of Susquehanna Alchemy, a philosopher, a poetic writer, and a traveler of the path. Like many of the greatest minds I've been blessed enough to chat with, Michael knows the power of truth and synchronicity and follows where it leads. In a balancing act of peering into the darkest depths and also reaching for the brightest heights, Michael inspires us all to walk with him as he travels. Michael, thank you for being here again. It's so awesome to have you back.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for that that thoughtful introduction. It's a lot to live up to. I'll do my best.
You're the one who inspired it, so you're already there, I think. All right, and then I just want to tell everyone that Rogue Ways is very pleased to announce the formation of the Eyes Open Network. This new collective of creators is comprised of myself, of Benjamin Balderson of Odin's Alchemy, Claude Furry of Talking Nonsense, Steve Poikonen of Slow News Day Podcast, and Brad Tracy of JFK to 9/11. These incredible creators will get together at least once a month to deliver a State of the Union Roundtable Squawkorama. Expect wacky antics, topical philosophical wanderings, and nearly illegal amounts of fun. This content will only be available for Patreon members of Rogue Ways, so go to www.patreon.com/rogueways right now to subscribe. And now, as always, our pointless question of the episode. Michael, I was wondering what types of astrological omens you are seeing in the stars so far in 2019 or for 2019 in general, or if you've thought much about that yet.
Well, I mean, we're knee deep in the middle of probably the most interesting thing, so far, in between the eclipse cycle. We're recording this on Saturday it's 3:30 Eastern time, and I think the eclipse is tomorrow evening at like 1 in the morning, or right. 1 in the morning my time, at least
for you, right?
And so it kicked off 2 weeks ago, and eclipses always come in this 2-week cycle, and the time in between them is, particularly from an astrological perspective, like ripe for all sorts of things, whichever that astrological alignment would signify. And when things happen in the heavens, there's always like the general effect, the macrocosm. We're all underneath the heavenly bodies,
right? And
then there's also what's interesting. What people can do is you look at where the eclipse is actually occurring in the heavens, and I think it's like at 1 degree Leo is where the eclipse is, and then you're like, all right, well, how does that touch my chart, or does it touch my chart? And that usually has some sort of indication of how you personally are going to go and be affected. But
so like if you had your moon in Leo, for example, then that would be especially affecting you.
Yeah, I would say what would be more interesting is if you have something at 1 degree, whether that's 1 degree Leo or 1 degree something else, because that's where the harmonics happen. So what the zodiac is like, if you can imagine, it's a circle, and we are, from this perspective of Earth, whatever Earth is, we have this ring of stars that goes around and around and around and around. That's our never-ending story. And the heavens have been broken up into 12 equal pieces, and each one being 30 degrees. So 30 times 12 is your 360. And those are our signs, and they refer to a very specific place of the heavens. They refer to very specific stars and so forth. And when we say 1 degree or 10 degrees or what have you, you're talking about a very, very specific placement in the heavens. And the sign would tell you like where specifically, but the heavens are also broken up into this 12-piece, pizza pie, if you want to think about it that way. And all of them kind of have this 30-degree harmonic, or they're broken up into 30 degrees. So in the same way that if you have a piano and a piano's in tune, and let's say you go and you tap on middle C.
Yeah.
Every other wire, which is to the C in the different octaves, is going to physically vibrate.
I love that. I love that concept.
Yeah. And it's the nature of reality. I mean, that's what really happens. Like what happened, and it's so interesting when you think about it. It's like they vibrate because they've been tightened at such a level that they're something matches up, and the vibrations per second, the hertz, the reason why it's in tune is because those vibrations per second are factors of one another, like 440 vibrations per second and 220 vibrations per second. So that's how our natural world works. And so when we look at what's happening in the heavens, and we know that like 1 degree is going to be in a very, depending upon where in the circle it is touching, but it's going to be in resonance with all the other 1 degrees.
That's
and
fascinating.
so that's why you're like, okay, well, I got 1 degree here. And then you look at like the nature, at least in astrological theory, they're going to say like there's harmonious sort of these resonances, or they'll call them aspects in astrology, or there are disharmonious, which, I mean, it's just intensity and, you know, and less intensity maybe, or like disruptiveness, or but you can go and look at that, and it doesn't necessarily have to be your moon. You can see like what other planets it does, and that's the beauty of the art form of astrology is it's so broad, and it allows for so much creativity. And there's no one person who reads the stars who's going to read it exactly the same way. You're going to read it through your own astrology. And so that's what's cool about talking to other people. It's like, oh, yeah. I like that perspective. I'm like, okay, that kind of makes sense to me. And that's what I find is interesting. I love of getting a lot of different perspectives.
Yeah, and I love that I've so far found that there's certain astrologers who I can find that whatever they're talking about, their analysis for it might be a little bit different than someone else's, but theirs tends to be like ring more true for me. So maybe not for someone else, but whatever that aspect is, works out for me. And I love that it can be that artistic. Like that's a beautiful thing.
Exactly. And I think that's people who, I mean, it's my personal opinion that, if you have an interest in astrology, it's ultimately to push you to be able to read your own chart. But it is a bit of a learning curve. But during that learning curve, and even like you could spend your entire life reading your chart, and you're always going to see something new. But you're going to be drawn to different people from their perspective. And, you know, just trust that. And at some point you're gonna be like, all right, I've heard enough of this person. I'm going to go somewhere else. Or I apply what they say to my own understanding of what I'm looking at.
Yeah. I would love to learn astrology enough to be able to. I did like interpret my own chart at some point, but I didn't retain many of those skills. So I have a very basic understanding of any of it. But it's always awesome to talk to you about your interpretations about those things.
Well, I think everyone, like, it's kind of like golf. Like you talk to anyone who plays golf, and it doesn't matter where you are in the continuum of skill sets. It's like, you always know, like if someone's like, oh, you're a pretty good golfer. You're like, no, I'm not. You know, you think in your mind, there's someone so much better, because there's such a wide, there's so much room to be good at something. And astrology is so broad. Like, you know, you've got the guy who's the most knowledgeable guy on the planet in astrology, and he's probably thinking there's so much to learn.
Yeah, that's true.
So it's like it's a dance, or it's a journey and a dance. It's like, you know, as you become I'll take a step back. I give readings, but I always, when I do it, I do it more as a ceremony. That's my approach, because I don't think the interpretation is the most important thing. I mean, certainly, like, everyone likes to have that itch scratched. I like to have that itch scratched. Like, you know, you got this rational mind that likes to hear stuff. You're like, oh yeah, that's true. And you're like, oh wow. But the reality of it, or the deeper reality, in my opinion, at least, is, and particularly the way which I go about presenting the information, is to make it crystal clear that what astrology is a reflection of what the heavens look like at the moment you took your first birth, the moment you left the womb and you took your first birth. That is the largest transition you will ever take. And there's this time date stamp, and without getting of you and the solar system, or you of the macrocosm, or you of like the known universe. And so when that becomes real, like when you're thinking about it, you're like, okay, I understand it. Like, Jupiter really was right here, and the moon was there, and I don't have to worry about what that means. all I have to really recognize is the fact that this is my unique connection, and this is objective, and this is not like, it's not like, oh, is this a right interpretation or a wrong interpretation? It's more so like, I really am part of something.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way to describe it too. But I love that you're saying like it's an objective truth that this is where the planets were and stars were at the moment of your birth. But it's also then there's that subjective side we're talking about where you can interpret it and there's an art to that. And like you're saying, you can come back to that over and over again and maybe find something new and different each time, which then also would just reflect your kind of growing, changing self through your journey of life, which is pretty awesome.
Oh, I'll tell you a personal story. So,
I love that about you.
I mean, I've been studying my chart for, I mean, I've known about astrology probably since I was a teenager, and I found it interesting. And then I got interested in the entire chart maybe about 15 years ago. And really about the last 4 years do I feel had I been comfortable in terms of interpreting or other people's. But so I have experience, and the majority of anyone's experience is studying their own chart. And I've looked at it thousands of times. And about 2 years ago, I see the most, if I were to see this in someone else's chart, like that would probably be where my eye would first go. But it never sunk into my thinking mind. Like, I mean, I just overlooked it. I looked at this, I looked at that, I focused this. And the best way I understand that, or I would interpret that, would be I wasn't ready for it. I wasn't ready. Like, I was not at a point in life where I could deal with what that was implying. And so that's the little thing when you have this experience and like you look at your chart, like, oh, you know, I've looked at this 1,000 times. It's like, and this is the magic and the beauty of astrology, is like, it's going to meet you. It's going to meet you where you are, and you never know what it's going to say.
Yeah. You're totally making me want to go revisit my own chart now.
I hope so. Yeah. I mean, it's fun. And it also makes it, for example, so eclipses. So we talk about the eclipse, and you know, only a small percentage of people are going to be aware of that from an astrological perspective in the first place.
Right.
But from that group, there's another subgroup who's then able to really kind of personalize it. Like, it's fun to hear all of these different interpretations. This means this and this means that. But then to be able to go and say, well, let me look at my own chart and see where it is, and let me see how personal this is. And then you can go and test it. You're like, okay, if this is saying that, if this is what the astrological model would be implying, well, and I can see that I'm touched in this place in my chart, let me go and watch life and let me see if this makes sense. And let me also go see what's happening in other people's lives, and you'd be able to, like, I bet you this is touching your chart somewhere strong.
Yeah.
For anyone who's going through something. And what's interesting, which is so, in my opinion, so much more significant than being able to like offer on the spot color commentary, it's you are entering into a living, real-time relationship with the macrocosm environment.
Yeah.
And when that happens, like, regardless of what that relationship is, you're expanding. And you're connecting to something bigger. And no matter what, that will serve you no matter who, what, where, when you are.
That's so awesome. I love it. I really, I just like that interplay that you're talking about and moving through it. And I just don't think that that's a view that I've had of astrology up until this moment. I think it's really cool. And I like that it's that living, breathing thing. It's very dynamic. So like you can use this as you're moving through each moment in life. And then what you're saying, like to look at how something might affect your personal chart in a moment and to go then test to see if it's true in your life. But you could also maybe like use that to decide whether or not this is the right time to take whatever certain action you've been considering, or to start whatever you've been considering, or maybe to hold back on it or whatnot.
If it serves you, then I say it's good. Astrology certainly has its potential pitfalls. Like, I know people who become slaves to their astrology.
Like they won't.
I can't do this because I'm that, you know, and they limit themselves. And then there's the So there's so many different versions of astrology. There's Western astrology, Vedic astrology, and Chinese astrology, and then within all of those systems are different ways of slicing and dicing it. And there's the part of the mind which wants to say one has to be correct is the wrong way to look at it, in my opinion. Because so I don't know what Earth is. You know, I don't have anything better than like either like a flat disc or a spinning ball, but like I don't have an answer, but I do know that I'm on something. And so like I'm comfortable with that. I don't know what the heavens are. I don't know what these white dots are that show up when the sky gets dark. But I got a story, and I don't have a better story. But regardless, I know that I can recognize the stars, and I can also identify. We can identify the planets because they're moving.
Right.
And we know that is true, and we exist within it. And we're in a matrix in it. Like a matrix is an environment which we live in and breathe and we grow in.
Right. And it doesn't have to be like this computer construct that like the movie. It's like just the environment that helps you proceed.
But it's also, we're blind to matrices. Like if you, particularly a matrix you have always been in, because you have always been in it, you've never had anything to compare what not being in this is. So it's like you're blind to it. So that's something which we move into is easier because you can like, yeah, I remember life before there was the internet. I can remember life before we had smartphones, you know, those are matrices as well. But astrology is a matrix which we're all in. So whatever these planets are, whatever these stars are, whatever we call Earth, we are within this environment where the stars and the planets, whatever we want to call them, are above us. And there are all of these different systems which people can use to interpret queries or questions into, like, you know, I'm asking it out and then it echoes back in, you know, it's the ultimate echo chamber. Because what's going to happen is the person who queries it is going to receive whatever that response is, and it's going to come through their lenses. And if they understand filter it, whether they understand it Western, whether they understand it Vedic, whether they understand it through, you know, there are infinite ways. And it's not that they're competing.
I love that. I totally am agreeing with that. You can find something of value in all of them. You could probably do a fusion of all of them. Like you could do whatever you want with it.
You could do what you want. And then you, as someone who is looking for insight, because ultimately what's happening is if you're going to go to someone to look at your chart, you're asking someone to describe your matrix, because you're in your matrix and you don't know what it's like you can kind of see some stuff, but it's the hardest thing to understand that which you understand with. So to understand you through you, like, I mean, that's it's a blind spot. And so you need two mirrors, you need two reflections. You can't see the back of your head with one mirror, you need two mirrors. And so you go to someone else and they're like, yeah, well, you know, this is what I got, this is what the universe gave me, what do you see with this?
They're like, your hair looks bad right here, fix it.
Exactly. And then you go and just like what you're saying, it's like you're going to resonate with them or you're not going to resonate with them, but you're going to take that and then you're going to go hear something else and you're going to go and study yourself and you're going to look at your life. And as you're doing this, you are developing this understanding of self. Like, it's not like a destination. It's not like all of a sudden you're like, oh, suddenly I got myself figured out and my life is like my life changes. It's more so that you have a better understanding for navigation, because at best it is a map.
I love, sorry, go ahead.
No, go on, please.
Well, I've heard that because I do some tarot card reading, and I'll do a reading on myself every once in a while. And I've heard from people that you shouldn't do that because you're not unbiased enough to interpret your own reading. And I thought that was really interesting because I do it all the time. And I feel like I get, you know, positive, negative, I get criticism, I get praise from the reader, whatever. So I'm always kind of like, well, I think I'm unbiased enough to do it. But now I've always wondered, since I heard that, like, is that a mistake, or is it just kind of like this where you can get something, but you still might have like the blind spot that you're not going to see?
I mean, again, I don't have, I haven't gotten the book which gave me all the rules yet, but I'll tell you my opinion. So, I I think that it's not so much mistakes as much as it is understanding limitations or the quality of the situation, because it's absolutely true. I mean, I guess it's potential that someone can read their own cards and like I'm saying before, like read your own chart, but it requires, cards are a little bit different because they're always changing versus like, you know, your chart you're going to carry with you for a long time. So you can really get ingrained, but yeah, you're going to read it with your own bias. It doesn't necessarily make it good or bad. It just makes like, oh, I know that I'm reading this with my own bias.
Just true of every moment of your life, no matter what you do, really.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And so when you recognize it as what it is, and then you take it like, you know, the good, the bad, and the ugly with it, well, then you're allowed to, you get the freedom. You're not limiting yourself to like, okay, this is right or this is wrong or this is a mistake or not.
And I think it's with anything like that, you have to always have that possibility that you've misinterpreted anyways. It's not like you're going to read it and be like, well, that's done and that's solid. That's exactly the truth. And there's no change to this ever.
Well, I mean, I don't think there's an objective truth when you're talking about a subjective job. I mean, it's like this. You've got objective reality. So let's say me and you are in line to go on a roller coaster. That is 100% objective. Like you and I are in line. There's like no one like, yes, they're in line. They're for a roller coaster. They're going to go on a roller coaster. Now, how do you feel about roller coasters? Do you like roller coasters?
I think I like roller coasters, but to be honest, I haven't been on one in so long that I'm not sure. Right, so I loved them at some point.
This is the scary, like this is the biggest, most intimidating roller coaster you've ever seen. We're standing in line and you're feeling inside. You're like, I'm a little bit nervous. Yeah. I don't know, you know, I'm not a young kid anymore. And I don't know if I want to go on this experience. I don't necessarily need to have this sensation that I think I'm going to die. Yeah. And so you've got this anxiety inside. And then let's say I love roller coasters. I'm like, there is nothing more thrilling and exhilarating than to be like strapped in above the tree line and drop down. And when else am I going to have this opportunity? Now that's totally subjective. Now you're nervous and I'm excited. Subjective reality, objective reality. We're both in line.
Yeah.
What's real? Right? Like what's important in that? It's like you could go and say like, well, completely like they're in line and that's the end of the story. But that's not the story at all, because the story is how do you feel about it? How are you affected? Like otherwise it's not a story. It's just it's a bunch of like facts and that's you know, it's boring. But then at the same time, there's no truth to the fact that I'm excited about it. It's my truth that I'm excited, but it's not universally true that the card or the roller coaster is exciting, and it's not universally true that it should be filling you with anxiety, but it is our truth. So when we look at cards, like it's truth, like, yeah, I just picked the 7 of Cups and I picked the Ace of Wands, you know, whatever. And that's subjective. But your interpretation is just as real as anyone else's. And part of the dance is recognize it, because, you know, what happens if you go on enough roller coaster rides, you're probably going to eventually like it.
Yeah.
Once you realize you don't die. And I would imagine the more you go and you look at cards, and you become familiar with a language of interpretation, well, then your quality with it will probably change. But, you know, it's always meeting you where you are. So like I like cards and I see something, they're dangerous because I play with cards a lot. Yeah. And when you play with decks which have like something like, let's say, a scary image, like a scary thought, like the Tower card, or like, you know, something you don't want to get. You know that even if you pick that, you can't take that out of your mind. And then you're like, when does this become self-fulfilling prophecy? Because now you're looking for this. And like,
yeah, true.
That's part of I believe the learning curve and the maturity that comes with working with these esoteric systems is, you know, there's a history of them being dangerous. And I think that comes from a couple different places. But one of them is they can be dangerous. They cannot serve you. You can go in some places you might not have gone to had you not been participating. So there's always
absolutely true. I've definitely made some life choices based off of, I wouldn't say based off of tarot readings, but there's been some tarot readings that have definitely nudged me in certain directions that maybe I wouldn't have without them. You know, I never take it as the only indicator of what I think is true or what I should do, but I think that's part of it. But I was wondering so there's this thing with Mercury retrograde, which I've realized is this huge like trigger for people. Some people don't want to talk about it. Some people want to talk about it all the time. Some people love it. Some people hate it. But there's this thing that I've noticed that bothers me. It's Mercury retrograde is particularly popular, and I'm sure there's other planets in retrograde that we could talk about that maybe would be similar. But when Mercury is in retrograde and people have a disagreement or some sort of interpersonal negativity in their relationship, then they blame it on Mercury retrograde. And I'm always like, okay, like probably Mercury retrograde played a part in the miscommunication part, but that doesn't mean that like the core of the issues that you're dealing with that person aren't real, or that they wouldn't have come to a head at some point, because I think that's that thing about objective truth and subjective truth that we're kind of getting at, right? The objective truth is that there was a problem. Mm-hmm. The subjective truth is that you both experienced it in various ways, or like expressed it in various ways, or whatever. So I get kind of irked when people blame astrology for things. And like, I think there's powers that are affecting us and effects that those planetary movements have, but I don't think they, I don't know. Do you know what I'm trying to say?
No,
what
I
do
know
you think
exactly.
about that?
I agree with you completely. I mean, personally speaking, I place little value in Mercury retrograde. I'm aware of it, I suppose. And then particularly, like, I mean, if you're going to, if you're going to be aware of the heavens and their potential impacts upon your life, like specifically Mercury in retrograde, if I was going to sign a contract, let's say, during that period, like maybe I'd be aware, like maybe I'd be like, all right, let me go make certain I's are dotted and T's are crossed. Yeah. But I mean, me personally, that's about as much weight I put into that. I'm in complete agreement with you that I think that it's been, it seems to be the people who are most intrigued by that may be the most novice in astrology. And I don't mean that in anything other than the fact that they're putting too much weight into that. And just like what you're saying, like, it's not going to go and cause something as much as it may bring out an underlying situation.
It might speed it along a little or something. Yeah.
I mean, that said, I suppose like someone where Mercury is particularly strong in their chart, maybe that is something which they need to follow more closely. It's just not that strong in my chart.
Maybe, yeah. I mean, I do hear people who are like, every time it's Mercury retrograde, I don't even have to like look to see. I can just tell because all of my electronics start, failing and I can't send emails or whatever. And that, I can see that totally. But I guess I think it's weird. I think it's weird to want to blame your kind of emotional experiences in life on astrology, or at least to not then also take responsibility for them.
Right. I mean,
say
okay, well, and that goes back to like the idea of like limiting yourself or enslaving yourself to your chart is like, oh wow, I've got Pluto squared Venus and my love life is always screwed or something like that.
Right.
And it's I mean, yeah, you can look at things any way you want. It's a free country, they say.
Right. They say.
But in my opinion, that is I'm an optimist. My worldview is very, very optimistic, and I think everything here is to serve in order to grow. So, when you recognize the things that don't flow smoothly, and realistically, things that if all we had was stuff that flows smoothly, we probably wouldn't do anything. It's like, particularly from astrology.
I would lay on the couch and play video games all day if that was the thing. If I could just get away with that, that'd be totally cool.
Right. And
maybe not really,
but you need some friction to make fire. You need some friction. True. And so like, we're looking at someone's personal chart, and there could be an idea that, oh no, I don't want to see anything which is which implies a difficult exchange of archetypical energies, it's no, this is where I get to work. Like if all you,
Yeah.
and it's all, there's a phrase I've heard astrologers saying, which is typically the best people have the worst charts, because it brings out the best in people. Like, having things, it's like spoiling the child. Like, when everything is easy, like no one wins. No one wins.
True. I read a thing at some point that was saying that people who are beautiful tend to have this, like, the easiest way through life. Like, people just do things for them. They get opportunities handed to them. They don't have to impress anyone or work hard to do it. And then people who have, like, the best personalities and kind of outlook in life and abilities are the people who have had it the hardest, and and a lot of times are not as good looking. And I'm like, that's so fascinating to think that, like, something like your looks can determine that big of a factor of your personality based on how easy or hard it made your life.
I want to say it's called The Secret Flute, maybe The Magic Flute. I don't know. It's a Bruce Lee movie. And I'm pretty certain it's a Bruce Lee movie. It's a long time since I've seen it, but there was a scene where this guy's on a journey, that's always in these films, and he's taken across a river by like a young boy. It was like maybe like 15 or 16, and the young boy takes him across the river on the boat, and when they get to the other side, Bruce Lee punches him in face and like destroys his absolutely beautiful appearance. And he's like, "What did you do that for?" He's like, "You'll thank me for that one day. You're too pretty for your own good."
That's so awesome.
It's just like that point which you just made. And there's something really interesting. And I think that also goes to like this idea of the culture which we live in now, or like the time which we live in, which is, the inversion culture, where what's good is good and what's bad is bad. And so as we, and don't get me wrong, I like beautiful things. I like beautiful people.
I like beauty.
But there is this, when we put it up on such a pedestal, when when you're a supermodel and you're making $35 million to
literally just look the way you already look.
Yeah. But then, the flip side is, I don't know how much you've looked into. Apparently obviously, if you know anything about what goes on behind culture and society, it's, high fashion is a really dark industry. So it's,
whether we're talking about like how people have to almost mutilate their bodies to stay in the business, basically, and eat nothing and like never nourish themselves, but then also the practices side of the industry too. Like we're talking about on an episode a while ago, Kate Spade. Like there's conjecture that possibly she was involved in child trafficking.
Yeah, all
allegedly,
of that.
Right?
When you begin to go, there was a guy, I used to watch him. I don't think he makes videos anymore, but there was a time where I just couldn't get enough of his content. Black Child was the name of his.
Oh yeah, I feel like I remember that.
He was. Oh, I loved his style. He had this great way of presenting. Like, he was a great storyteller. But he taught, and what he did very well was he looked into popular culture and really would get into the darker side, the human trafficking, the sacrifice, like all this stuff which only the darkest of conspiracy researchers like to go, right? That's half the reason why it hides from most people, is because they don't have the stomachs to hear it, and
they literally don't even want to know that it exists.
They don't have the Constitution. And then the person who does have the Constitution, it's friggin' cancer for the soul. I'll tell you that right now, because you're like, I got this itch I didn't know could be scratched, and I'm watching this, and like you're feeling it in your head. But that's another topic.
Yeah.
But he's gone in considerably about the high fashion industry and really breaking down not just like, esoteric symbols, but actually like, really dark behaviors, dark practices, like no different than what you hear about like in Hollywood or any of these kind of inversion type, parasitic, adrenochrome, all of this sort of world.
Yeah. I mean, like drinking blood and like eating feces is not, it's not a joke, and it's not like a conspiracy theory like that Marina Abramovich character. This is the type of stuff that she promotes openly. It's not even like hidden really. I mean, you have to go looking for it to find it, but it's not like a crackpot conspiracy theory, you know?
Yeah.
Like this is what they're doing. And I just can't, no part of my being understands wanting to participate in that. But then, I mean, I guess I can look at it and say, well, if you're really, you know, if you're growing up and you're like, well, I want to be a model and I want to be in that industry, and you start getting into it and you start realizing like, well, if I'm going to hang out with this person and get that lucky break, then they're going to this party where people are, you know, eating cakes that look like dead bodies. Like, okay, I guess I'm okay with that. And then the next step is whatever the next step is. And you kind of like sequentially go through the
Yeah.
degradation.
There's that. And then there's also like, I mean, there are probably some real brand name like supermodels, but you know, the high fashion world probably has many models who no one knows who their name is. And a lot of times that's associated with you know, there is human trafficking, and there's like rampant drug abuse, like forced drug addiction. There's like forced debt. Like, okay, you come on in and we're going to go and get you these jobs. And then you come out of it and you're like, how come I owe you $30,000? You're like, well, for this and that and that and this. And then you're like, you have to go do 10 more shows. And then this is how you get out of it. Like it's a whirlpool, like, which will
like
suck
slavery.
It will take out like,
Yeah,
you know,
it is slavery.
It's slavery. It's so many of these systems are, and like in a lot of ways, like, I mean, this is my opinion, but when you see like these industries, these mainstream industries, so we're kind of going back and forth of being able to understand things from like someone who has a conspiratorial perspective, and then also being someone who's like a real human being who's like, I know what it's like to like want to have a job and want to have like a good career or what have you. And these certain industries, they appeal, like, let's say acting, let's say Hollywood, let's say modeling, let's say politics, all of those kind of appeal to a certain personality type, and they appeal to a more base level of being, like, you know, look at me and look how pretty I am. Like, I love theater. I like acting. I used to act when I was a kid. Like, I get it, but like it feeds. I don't believe it's naturally, the human being is not naturally designed to have that level of attention. Like and if you happen to have, if that is going to be your destiny, you have to be prepared, and you have to be surrounded by people who understand that you know, this is how you handle that, because it is not a normal place to be. So now we flip that and we're like, there's nothing greater. You want to be as famous as you can be, and you want to be famous for like really like superficial reasons, and it's encouraging that, and then the outer world, the outer culture is reflecting back to you like, this is good, look,
we love it.
We love it, but it's very degrading. And then these industries are degrading, so you're like, how do I go one step further and one step further? Like, you're like, how did I get into this madhouse to begin with?
Well, and I look at like do you know Kesha? Okay, so like her story is really disturbing, right? If it's true, she allegedly was, you know, got into the industry singing and everything with whoever her manager is. I don't remember his name, but then it comes out not that long ago that actually the whole time he was drugging her and kind of, I think, raping her is what is alleged. At the very least, putting her in situations where she would have been possibly raped or abused. You know, and she was so young, so it's like you take this very young, vulnerable person who has talent. She's a talented person. I never wanted to like her, but I can't deny that she doesn't have some talent. You know, and she wants to be praised for that and get attention for that. It's like a pretty natural thing. But then to take that and then just subvert her energies into these dark places and use her. And if that's all true and real, it looks like it really crushed her. I'm proud of her if it's true, for coming out and being a stronger person and leaving that behind and then speaking out about it. That's very powerful. And I hope that that is a good place that she's in now. But it's like, that is probably one of the better stories, right? Probably more often no one comes out of that.
It's definitely one of the most known stories.
Yeah.
And so the way the story is presented, and again, like, you know, is this story, is this to satisfy the, you know, the population who's starting to wake up to it and be like, or, you know, is it real? I don't know. I don't like everything that comes from the computer box. I'm suspect of everything. You know, it's like, I don't know what's on the other side of this. This is beyond. So, but that being said, the story is, it's not her manager, it was her producer. And this was not just like a normal producer. This guy like has his hand, like an ungodly percentage of music which is played on popular radio has gone through his, they're like maybe like 3 top tier producers, and he's one of them. And they're incredibly skilled and gifted at understanding the like really the frequencies and powers of music, like how to make certain hooks which resonate on certain frequencies within people. You're like, I can't stop thinking about it. It's like,
literally can't stop thinking about it. It's crazy. It bothers me. It's
sonic MSG.
Yes.
All right. Well, because MSG was designed to trick your body to be like, oh, this is friggin' awesome. What? This is pink slime, horse meat shaped in a burger. Doesn't matter. You got that MSG. And I'm like, I love it. And so the same thing, like that's a quality, and that quality can be presented in infinite ways. And if someone is particularly knowledgeable, you know, they can use it. And so this guy, and what was being said about this guy is like, he's and the implications were just that, like that you know, with the drugging and the sexual abuse, and just really keeping someone on the edge of like mental of mental breakdown. Maybe that's the way. Like it's all like MK Ultra too. Like there's this when there's got to be a line where you know, you don't want to go too far, where you start to have what's known as diminishing returns, where you're controlling people. And you know, this is a very like hardcore controlling culture which we're in, and the foundation of it seems to be the strongest. Like, you know, you may not have, if you listen to one of her songs, you may not have that personal experience, but guess what? That is in the quality of the music. And so the recording artist is definitely having the more intense experience, but it's being passed on to you or anyone who listens to it. I mean, that's the nature of this collectivism of you know, just being human and being in the same sort of environment.
And the power of the wavelengths of music that to transmit that experience straight into you.
There's this guy, his name's Hans, I want to say Utter, Utter. And he's the best that I know who can explain like the science behind like the music and how it affects the human being, like the vessel of being in body, how we work. And when you start to hear that, I mean, it's I find it fascinating because it begins to really put into or give us clues as to exactly what it is to be in body, to be human, like to have this experience.
Right. And have these sensory experiences.
Well, I mean, just to be alive. I mean, no one knows where we are. No one knows how we got here. No one was told anything. Everything about us has been occulted. It's been hidden from us. And you spend enough time reading enough like kind of alternative books, and you run across this idea all the time. It's like, you know, if human beings only understood how powerful they were or what they really are. And like, I read that, I'm like, that makes me feel good, I suppose. But I'm like,
what is it actually?
Like, give me something more. Like, don't tell me.
What am I supposed to be doing then?
I mean, that's no different than telling me that Santa Claus is coming to my house. Like, you're not giving me any sort of meat. It's like opening me up to possibilities. But like optimism and like all sorts of other stuff can dictate you into maybe buying something which is not real. So when something real, something material begins to show itself, like whether that's cymatics or whether that's, I've gotten really excited about all of this, like Tartarian Empire star fortresses, because what that implies about our environment. If we have, again, like all things are suspect. Like I certainly am, like I'm engrossed. I'm paying attention. It makes sense to me, and it makes sense in a lot of ways. But I'm like, I've fallen for a lot of things that have made sense for me in the past. So it's like, fool me once. But But the idea of architecture actually being a mechanism of pulling in energy and distributing energy, and this architecture is beautiful, and it's like everything about it makes sense. There's not a place where it doesn't make sense, and it lasts like through who knows how, we don't know how long anything is. But so if that is the case, and I'm really excited about the potential that is a truth, then what does that say about our environment? And then, what do we know about cymatics? What does that say about us? What do we know about NLP and MK Ultra? Why would MK Ultra work? What does that say about what we have? And like, we know that in the inversion culture, nothing is created. All it is flipped. It's backmasked.
Yeah.
And so then we could double reverse it to get a good understanding of like, well, maybe what some of the truth is, and the truth of what it is to be me, for what it is to be you.
And so then, like, what would the reverse of MK Ultra be? Would it be like meditating and like listening to really beautiful, like maybe classical music or something, and like you're programming yourself instead of going into psychoses and shattering your mind and becoming enslaved to that? You're like creating and like interconnecting and building your mind or something.
So this is how I describe MK Ultra. MK Ultra is weaponized alchemy, internal alchemy. So I'm going to define internal alchemy. I'm not going to get real mystical. I'm going to be like real, just human being. But I certainly think that there are much greater implications. But there's something that happens from the human experience through just being alive for a certain number of years and having a certain number of hardships and gaining experience and applying that with knowledge while still remaining a kind, compassionate human being. Like you as a human being, patina, like leather or copper, like you become this other quality, which isn't new, but it's something that only comes from being worn. And to me, that is the alchemy of being human, or at least emotional alchemy. That's sort of like, I've been through a whole bunch of shit, and it's made me a better person because of it. And so the reason why that works is basically what MK Ultra is all about. It's like when you are brought to these emotional limits of what you can handle, then like certain other good things come out. And some of the things that I described at first, like the internal alchemy or the emotional alchemy, I talked about is like just being a good person, but you can also like develop some really interesting skills. You can become very good at stuff as a human being also when you're pushing and working hard and like, I've got to do this to feed my family, or I got to do whatever life is presented. And the same thing seems to be happening with MK Ultra in the way that it's taken this natural process of when we are pushed. And it's also taking an understanding of how consciousness works, like what we naturally do, like in that emotional processes, we are, whenever we have an experience which we are unable to fully process emotionally, it's stored in the body. I mean, that's just, it's stored in the mind, stored in the body, stored wherever stuff is stored that we don't see, whatever that is. And it provides us the opportunity later in life to be able to experience it, work through. And that's usually going to come through like unconscious acting out, like, you know, whatever it is that you do. Like, why do I keep repeating these sort of things? It's like I keep unconsciously doing this stuff which happened way long ago until I finally get able to process it, and then I can integrate it. And so when that happens, when you separate that thing from you, you basically have a split. You've taken a part of yourself and you've separated it. Well, that's MK Ultra. They've done that to the extreme. And that's what they would call multiple personality, or what do they call it now?
Dissociative.
Yeah, right. DID. But it's the same idea of this split. And if you've ever seen like documentaries of people who really, really have like full blown experiential DID, you see everything changes in their body. Like everything. I've heard, like I've read this. I don't know if it's true because, you know, I'm suspect of everything, but like scars appear and disappear.
I've heard that too. Yeah.
Yeah. So we probably read the same stuff, you know, you know, who knows if it's accurate, but I definitely know like posture changes, voice changes, faces, abilities to like mental abilities. Like he's really good with math and she's a great poet.
French.
Right? Yeah. I can speak French. So it's like, again, this goes back to the question. Well, then what are we? How do we have these capabilities? What can we do? What is this environment? You know, how do we relate to the earth? How do we relate to each other? How do we relate to the heavens? These are rhetorical questions, meaning like, I don't have any answers.
Yeah.
But I think that we're moving towards, particularly this community, when I say this community, I mean any community which is willing to go and look at maybe what's been hidden from us, and then integrate what we can learn from that, is pulling that together and trying to like, all right, we have this information now, how do we navigate being alive in this time? What's going on? Look at all this stuff. What are we going to do?
I love it. Yeah, that multiple personalities and their face changing completely, and some people would say like, well, that's you know, another actual entity coming through that person, or they're a demonic possession or something. You know, there's something like that going on where it's not just the person. But I really don't think that's it. I really think that it's something of yourself. You know, when you do fracture off that part of yourself, it probably feels and seems like another outside entity. But I think that's part of the process of healing, is like reassociating that and reintegrating it. Kind of like what you're talking about, to be back to being one whole identity with multiple aspects, you know, or multiple, I guess, like you could then choose to develop any aspect of yourself. It's like, that's within you, you know, it's not a separate part of you. I just wanted to touch on that because I don't think it's something outside of them that's like coming through them.
I don't know. I'm open.
Yeah. I think there are things like that exist. I don't think that every example of someone
that is probably
manifesting. Yeah.
That's probably true. There's once a point in my life where I did not subscribe to the idea of demonic possession. Yeah. And I'm at where I am right now is I'm like, I think that maybe that's definitely a possibility. But I don't know enough, and I don't know if it's. I still think like what you're saying is it could also be totally separate, or I mean, there's another possibility. They are one and the same, like because we don't know who we are, like what it means to be in us. Like, you know, I talk to a lot of like what most people would call strange people who've got like very, very unorthodox ways of interacting with reality. And I don't necessarily always get what they're saying, but I love to hear these different perspectives. And I hear all of these things that what these people see and like what they're talking to. And I'm like, holy shit. Like, you know, if 1% of this is accurate, like what else is going on? And so I'm open to it all, but it's it's the journey of figuring out and navigating with some degree of consciousness. We have no idea how deep we go.
True.
We have no idea how deep any of this goes. Like we could be right at the bottom, or maybe there's like, you know, we're not even a tenth of the way down. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, there's this concept that I was listening to in a Gnostic lecture, you know, and there's this kind of goal you have to awaken your consciousness, right? And when you awaken your consciousness, maybe I'm saying it poorly, but maybe it's something akin to like waking up from a coma. You're like, oh my God, that was all a trip. Like that wasn't even, that was just some sort of other type of experience, but this is like real. But what they were also describing was like, if you get there, there's still more to go. Like you're still not out of the box or whatever however you want to look at that construct. And that's kind of a fascinating and possibly terrifying idea of what like life is, that you could just keep waking up to like higher levels. Like maybe we're like really far down, you know, or however you want to look at it.
Right. I mean, I agree completely. And if you go and you look at the what I personally look for when I'm trying to like navigate is I want to see consistency in stories. Like, can I see something in the natural world and I can see like there's an underlying consistency. And so we're being told all the time that you know, this particle is this is as small as it gets, or this is as big as it gets. And as soon as we're like, we figure this out, we're like, oh no, it goes so much deeper. And so it seems like again, like part of this never ending story, like you're never going to get to the bottom or the top of it.
Yeah.
Like, and at some point you have to go and stop chasing your tail.
Yes, because then I think that comes back to that whole concept that you hear at even like the first stages of any kind of spiritual awareness of like, be here now. Like, you're here now.
And then be here now. But but there's this thing that it's like, this is the whole prodigal son thing. Like you got to go and look.
True.
You got to go off. And then at some point you come back. And you come back with, and I think this is everyone's experience, like every individual, like, you know, everything is unique to you. Everything's unique to me. Everything's unique to the other person. But we can identify a commonality of moving out of comfort into comfort, going away and coming back and growing. And we have that compassion of, we all kind of have that same experience. It may not be my experience, it may not be yours, but we share that together. To me personally right now is I've been using the phrase a lot. We're all casualties of culture. Like I've yet to meet someone who is not a casualty of culture, you know, myself included, because we were born into this cultural matrix. And the matrix is intended, or this culture is intended, just as what we were saying, like with these different sort of like these industries where like everything is great, like, you know, oh, you become famous and you get all this money and like you're on the cover of magazines, but it's actually probably the worst experience you could ever imagine. I mean, there's certainly some perks, don't get me wrong, but but it comes with a price. And our culture is like saying this is what you want, and that the truth is our culture is constantly it's saying that the things we want or we should go after, the things which we should value, is exactly the last thing which is going to serve you. And by being a casualty of culture, and I really think, like, from my perspective, it began in 1945, or 1945 is really when a new section began, or a new saga, or what have you, like right after World War II ended. But everyone who has been born in, like, you know, we've been in the same sort of, we've been in the same trajectory, and it's getting more and more intense. And each generation after generation is becoming more blended with this environment, in the same way that a child will learn whatever language it is born into. Like whatever household it's born into, in 2 years, it will become that language. And then that language becomes your thoughts and all sorts of stuff like that. But the same is true with culture. And so when what's the quote? It's no sign of good mental health to be well adjusted to a sick society. And we are being encouraged to be well adjusted to our sick society. And we're beginning to, particularly now, it's happening in a greater number, is people are recognizing the sickness of the culture, and are beginning to recognize, hopefully, like, it's easy to look at the culture and see it's sick, but then to be able to apply that back to, like, well, how has that affected me?
Yeah. And what am I going to do about it?
Which is, again, why I think astrology is so important. It helps you get it out of your own experience. It helps you get out of your own personal story. So you're like, okay, this is where I am. This is part of it. There's no mistakes. So what do I do? And to me, this is what I see has happened is, and it's all about relationships. It's how we relate to ourselves, how we relate to, and that's like that could be everything from just understanding like your astrology and kind of these pre-inclinations. Is that a word? I don't know.
Yeah, it is now. It works.
Towards a way of being, and then recognizing how your own emotional world works, and recognizing your own experiential and all that sort of stuff. But it's also like being in body. It's how your body works. There is a right way to hold your body. There's a right way to move your body. There's a right way to breathe. There's a right way. All of this stuff no one ever told you about, right?
No, and it's so fascinating how really, like, it can change your life. As soon as I started being more aware of my breathing and not breathing in my chest and breathing in my belly, or like I started being aware that like I'll just like hold tension somewhere, and I'm like clenched up, and then I'm like, why am I doing that? And I just let it go
and release it, and there's all this stuff. You are learning you're learning your relationship with you.
And it makes you feel better, like just that simple tiny thing.
Everything is made. Our natural state is that we want to feel good. Yeah. Like, we want to be challenged, we want to grow, we want to have experience, but we want to feel good. And like, and the body is like, there's a right way to walk. There are ways where you can generate so much more power with less effort.
Yes.
I mean, there's so like, that's part of it. But then and that probably happens throughout, like, as you're growing up in adolescence and maybe adulthood, we're learning all of that. But most importantly is our relationship with both, like, the physical environment, what we call Earth, and then our relationship with the heavens.
Yeah.
And then also, like, we could say, like, divinity lies in, like, if you want to separate divinity from those two things, like, maybe they're one and the same, I don't know, but that's been totally taken from us.
Yes.
All of the Susquehanna mystery work points to, there is a very, very different way that we work with the environment. All of this Tartary architecture stuff is like, there's a very, very different way to work with the environment. We've got clues with the golden ratio. We've got clues with all this stuff, but we're like, that's part of it. And then looking at astrology, or not even so much the interpretation, but recognizing that there is a living, breathing heavens, and there's this correlation, and that's part of what we see with all of this old architecture, is it was in alignment with the heavens. So it's like, what is my relationship with the heavens? What is my relationship with my environment? What is my relationship with myself? Yeah. And then that is our primary relationships. But all of that's been taken from us. We've been made sick. We've made all of this sort of stuff. And then we're made to relate with other people, but no one has these foundations. And
the other people we're meant to relate with are all on the TV and, up on a stage or whatever. We're not really meant to relate with one another even.
Exactly.
It's weird to go get personal with somebody in public anymore. If you're like, hey, how's your day? And they're like, actually, how's your day? Like, how are you? And they're just like, who the fuck are you? Don't talk to me.
Don't make eye contact. Yeah, all of that stuff. You're absolutely right with the stars, which those are the stars they put on the screens, and that's hypnosis. I mean, make no mistake about that. And so, and they give you this is where the false stories are placed upon, and like how it continues. Like, I mean, obviously there's your immediate environment, your household, which you were raised in, the community which you were born in, but there's also the messages which are being told in through the media. And what's so interesting, and what I find interesting is when you look at popular culture and popular media, you look at the movies, you look at the books, you look at the TV shows, and you look at it from the different eras, and you see how different people and different relationships are presented, because this is what they're teaching people to emulate.
Yeah.
And then you could go and see, like, and it's tricky, because some of the stuff is like, you're going like, this is good. This is good, because without a doubt, the reason why, if you go back and you look at the attitudes, like racial attitudes in the 60s compared to like racial attitudes into the current time, they're completely different, right? We can see how humanity has changed, but TV is probably the biggest reason why that's happened. The Norman Lear television shows of the 70s really introduced this idea and was able to put in a new narrative into the mind. So like not everyone is repeating what their grandparents were doing.
Yes.
And so you're like, oh, okay, that's a good thing. And I agree with that. But then there's also like, we have this mechanism. We have this part of our mind which we are unable to see, hear, or feel. We can't think about it. We call it the subconscious, but I don't know what it is. Yeah. But there's this thing which controls everything in your thinking mind. Yeah. Everything you think is to make an excuse for what your subconscious tells you.
It's true.
And there are techniques and there are people who can communicate directly to your subconscious mind. And that is a huge blind spot. And that's what TV and that's what all of the mass media can do. I mean, that's like what we're talking about, the frequencies with the music. Like that's why it works, is because there's an understanding of the back door in your software program. And certain people understand it.
It's mechanical and it's acoustic and it's visual, like just the TV, like the flicker rate, the sounds that they're putting out through it, the wavelengths they're using, like all of it. It's all totally meant to entrance you. And who knows? I don't even personally understand the levels of it. I just know that it exists,
Oh, completely. And as it changes, I don't know if you remember this, like this is probably like 6 years ago, maybe. It was a national it came from the White House, where they said, we are getting rid of 100%. There will be no analog distribution of media. It will be 100% digital. And if there's anyone in the country who still has an analog receiving TV, the government will give you money to buy a digital TV.
They were handing out boxes. Do you remember those little boxes? Whatever that was. Yeah, they were giving those away. And you're like, anytime the government's giving you soft hardware to put into your that you got to question that, like why? Right. And so many people didn't. They're just like, oh, cool, free, whatever.
Well, that's the nature of reality, or that's the nature of these times. That's the nature of the effectiveness. That's the nature of all this sort of stuff. Like, if the last thing this is me personally, the last thing I want is someone who's got more awareness to me to look down at me and be like, that dude's a friggin' idiot.
Yeah,
because I'm doing the best I'm doing. Like, I know these people are doing their best, but you're absolutely right. And so that's part of the upgrade. Like, you can go and see it. Like, this actually is happening. I listen to MP3s. That format is a format which is very convenient. Do you know what an MP3 does?
No.
So what an MP3 does is it takes like a normal sound wave. Well, let's say it goes and it cuts off the very top and it cuts off the very bottom, stuff which is typically outside of perception of your hearing. So it sounds the same. Like, someone who's got a really fine ear would be able to maybe recognize some differences, but 80% of people are, particularly if you're listening to podcasts or something like that, you're not going to notice it.
Yeah.
But what you're doing is you are tuning your mechanism, your inner ear, which picks up vibration, which somehow turns it into stuff so that it goes into gray matter, and somehow all this magic happens. Yeah. And they're like, oh, we're reducing the amount of frequency which you are picking up. At the same time, that's happening with LED lights. And so our eyes and it's the nature of our environment. It's like, okay, we recognize that, like we also are learning there are things where we can counter that and all of that. Like, we don't want to be paranoid, but we also want to recognize, like, when you're walking into a viper's nest, like, you know.
Yeah. Well, and even if there's no kind of nefarious reason why that's being promoted or pushed out, even if that's true, you can still accept that perhaps there's a better sound quality that, especially if you look into like cymatics and other things that you can imagine is affecting your physiology, at the very least your experience of enjoyment of something, and you can decide that maybe I want to listen to records and have some analog sound pumping into my ears.
I mean, there's and that's the thing which I think is so interesting about the architecture of these star fortresses.
So I haven't heard much about Star Fortress. I mean, like, I've heard mention of them more recently, but I've looked a bit into Tartarian. We did an episode on Rogue Ways a little while, and we're doing another one tomorrow, actually, which by the time this show comes out, it may have been a few days ago. But that I don't know what a Star Fortress is.
So a Star Fortress. So think in your mind of like what you picture, like a medieval European village. Mm-hmm. All right, and they tend to have like they may be walled.
Yeah.
Okay. So most of these walls, they have this is the way which I understand it. They have like, you know, sharp corners, and they're kind of, and when you look at it from above, it kind of has a star shape. But the point is, all of the buildings, like these fortresses, whether it's in Southeast Asia, whether it's in Europe, whether it's in South America, the planning of the living space and the architecture of the living space of these people, it was designed in such a way that it's a power generator. It's able to pull it, like all of this kind of like
etheric energy or something.
Yeah, like what the Tesla coil, when Tesla built that thing, you know, and you know, there's, from the videos I've watched on it, they're all like, you know, there's no Tesla, and you know, that's very possible.
That's what I've heard too, right?
Like, so there's a couple, there are a lot of different implications when you dive into this. There's like all of history is just completely made up to hide this one history. There's the part of like, there was a cataclysm and the entire world got a mud flood. And then there's like the architecture. And for me, I'm personally more intrigued by the architecture. Or at least that's where I'm beginning. Like, you know, this is, you can't go in all places. And so the architect, what's being suggested is that all of these beautiful buildings were all part of this worldwide culture, which was in harmony with the environment. And like what we think of as churches, these were all, you know, or cathedrals, these were all these generative stations, which were pulling in the energy. And then the bells, or I think it's called the carillon. Is that what it is? Like this group of large bells, but it's all that in the rose windows, these stained glass windows, and all of these mosaics, which you see throughout the Middle Eastern world, are like cymatic base.
Yes,
and through the building itself, which is a what do you call it? A battery is one of them, which captures electricity or energy, a capacitor. So these buildings are like capacitors. Am I saying that right?
Yeah.
And as the people are in there, and the bells are ringing, and as the cymatics of the windows and of the tiles are setting these frequencies, which are going to align to us in these capacitors into the people, it's just working on the cellular level, like in the most real way, like the cells in your spinal fluid, like, and this is how we all connected. And you know, I'm listening to this. I'm trying to get real practical, because that's just kind of how I am. I'm like, do they still have light bulbs? Like, do they have light bulbs?
Yeah,
like, what,
I know.
Like, have they seen dark? Or maybe they don't. Or like, you know, was there like, so like another thing would be the when you looked at the copper helmets, which were worn like which are often shown with like maybe like the Phoenicians or that time period in that part of the world. They had these helmets and they had like a little point on top. Like you know, these were actually these were telepathic devices.
Perhaps, yeah.
Because because it fits the same architecture, and it's like the way that it captures it. Like, I don't know if that's accurate or not, but like it's starting to open up. Like, you know, as we begin to imagine, as we begin to envision other ways of which humanity may have once interacted with the environment, as we think of like, and that's a very structural way, but then there's also like how we act with the environment in, as I said before, like with the river, like, you know, that's a more natural way, but it's all these different ways. And we can begin to imagine, we can imagine a place, because this is, you know, I don't want to sound hokey, but like it does begin with what you see in your mind.
It does.
Everything does.
It really
and
does.
If no one can see something in their mind of like something tangible of how it works.
Yes.
Like this is why like capture the imagination was such an important part to both propagandists and the Disney Corporation, is because they want to control what you picture in your mind, because then that is hearts and minds.
Yeah.
That hearts and minds, that is the definition of belief. A belief is when your thinking and your feeling are in alignment. And it doesn't matter what it is you believe. If you truly have those in alignment, magical stuff happens. And
that is magic, right?
Look at any true believer of any, like find two true believers of opposing views, like a religious views, which are like one cannot be right because one's belief like takes out the other person's belief.
Yeah.
But these two people believe so fully in their heart that it fulfills them with great joy. And you realize it's not it's the act of believing is right. what is of importance. It's not what you believe. And that too has been weaponized.
Exactly. It definitely has been. Well, even the belief that we couldn't possibly have come from this type of a past, or the belief that we couldn't possibly have this clean energy that you're talking about. Like if this Tartarian history is true and that architecture is pulling this etheric energy out, you know, in this very natural, harmonious way, and then distributing it in this way that is non-destructive and very helpful, like we can't even imagine that. I mean, now we are, which is great. I love it. Because even if it ends up not being true, like what you're saying, imagining it, maybe it can become true, or maybe we can think of ways to try and get closer to that vision.
Exactly. Like it doesn't, like we don't have to get, it's like you're saying with like the Mercury and the retrograde. It's like, we don't got to get caught up in the detail. Like, oh, well, is it this or is it that? It's like, let's just keep going.
Yeah.
Like, you know, you
see where we go.
it. I mean, there was a time I used to read a lot of I think everyone who gets into this world, which we're in, like being open to what's really going on, tends to go through some predictable phases. And so part of it is like, you know, quantum mechanics, and part of it's like, you know, like the electric universe, and part of it's like, you know, you go through that and you need to have that understanding. And some people that really resonates, they're going to go and really get deep in that. And other people will go, you know, wherever. And, you know, that's part of the coolness of the culture of like, we all kind of get like there's more going on, but like I've studied this and I've studied that, and we share and we grow. So the little bit of time I spent in like more of that, like of more of the cosmology from a physics perspective, and they talk about scalar waves and all of that, and that's beyond my, I don't really get that. But I know it's something, like I kind of got it. Like it's, for me, it always felt like one of those magic 3D pictures. Like I can almost see what's jumping out. I know it's like right here, but I can't tell if it's like a rabbit pulling mice out of a magic hat. You know, I can't tell what it is yet.
Right.
So I held that, like, you know, that's been in the back of my mind. As soon as I saw I heard about this idea of the Tartary, these star fortresses and this architecture working that way, I was like, oh, that's what they're pulling out. That's what all of these other guys are talking about. And you can see like what pulls it through is not only a precision, but a beauty.
Yeah.
And that's part of being human too, is like the idea of like, I know what I'm doing. There's a precision, there's a skill, but then there's also this artistry about it.
Yes, good, true, and beautiful. I love the idea that, so it's pulling this energy down through these, you know, domes or whatever, let's say, and then there's the pipe organs that are often beneath the sort of cymatic, like rose windows, right? So, and like you were saying, there's like the bells that are being done. So like you're pulling energy down, you're maybe the intent of what the energy is being used for is set by the cymatics that are in the window or something, you know? And then windows, if you think, you know, glass is basically a liquid, right? Glass is always I think glass is a liquid, like real glass is a liquid. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's true. So then, and we know that water and liquids can like transmit energies in a certain way, and then sound definitely can. So it's like not each element of it is its own method of, and then it comes together in this like beautiful, harmonious way. Like it's just it's such a cool idea. And yeah, even if it ends up being a fiction, like fiction is one of my favorite things because of its ability to make us dream big and visualize something new.
It can make us dream big. So I think it's probably, it's pointing to a truth, what exactly the truth is. But when you begin to think about, like, when you actually look at these buildings from these cathedrals from the Middle Ages, and you see these structures that were in Cambodia, and you see what's built in South America, and you're like, something's doesn't make sense, but this makes sense when you tell me this. Like, how did they do this? Why was this done? Why is this so spectacularly beautiful? Why
don't we do it anymore?
Exactly.
Why did we stop?
There was, God, what's the guy's name? Is it Josh Reeves? Do you know who Josh Reeves is?
He just came up earlier today. I believe that is his name.
That's interesting. And so I remember this, like, I don't know, like 7 years ago. I remember listening to, he put out some documentaries, and it was, I want to say it was like, he found these rings, like stone rings in Texas or something. And
it was like a rock wall, right?
It was a rock wall. Yeah, it was the rock wall.
The rock wall, yeah.
And he did all of this measurement on like both the electromagnetic quality which this rock wall was producing, and then also the uniqueness of the materials that made it. You know, it's been a long time since, but when I think of like what we're talking about, like this potentiality of the way things could have been, or the way things were, or what could be, I go back to that. I'm like, okay, there's a real example. Yeah. There's a real example of something which I've heard of before, which doesn't exactly fit into that same storyline, but in a lot of ways it complements it. So to me, that's like, okay, this is complementary evidence, which makes me feel, okay, this seems to be has a greater likelihood of being accurate, or of being a truthful display.
Because you have that human created, intentional, like the materials are specific, the shape is probably specific, and then it is actually having this effect, is what you're saying. So you can measure that, right? If you go to the rock wall, allegedly, you can measure.
Exactly. And I trust this guy's work.
Yeah.
You know, maybe so we got this thing, right? It's like at some point you're going to have to be like, well, I know that I'm choosing to trust someone because I'm being vulnerable in this time. So I'm like, yeah, I trust this guy. Like I've seen him enough. And so I'm like, this is real.
But that's true for anything. Like if you are looking at science has axioms. Science and math both have axioms that you have to accept as true. They're unproven and they're untestable. And you have to accept them as true in order to go forward. So like no matter what you're doing, you are accepting axioms basically. You have to cross the chasm. Yeah. And you can still go back if you can still go back. Neil Kramer. Do you know who Neil Kramer is? I love Neil Kramer so Everyone loves Neil Kramer. I remember when so he was really, really impactful for me. Like 10 years ago, like he had this series of essays. I don't remember what it was called, but they were you could download them, and I've listened to them like 30 times each, but a lot of it stuck with me. And he gave such good advice in terms of kind of how to navigate this sort of stuff, like, you know, how to go to find the information to see what's really going on in the world, and like how to get out as quickly as possible, because you don't want to spend too much time there. Yeah. And how to like take information, particularly information which you can't prove to be true, but you're like, well, let me take this on and I can give it no weight. And then if something else better comes along, something which seems to be more true, something which is more verifiable, I can let this go because I'm not connected to it. I don't have identity tied into it. Yes, that is the master method, I think, what you're describing right there, not attaching your identity to anything, and you have two hands, right? One of them is holding what you're currently accepting. It's like, this is probable, but you still have the empty one that's like, maybe there's something else. Yeah. So, you know, that's I think where we are. I think that's more difficult for many people to accomplish than not, but I think working towards it is essential, you know? And I think even when you think you're there, you're probably not with a lot of things. There's probably things that you, any of us would have a hard time trying to question, you know? I mean, honestly, flat Earth got me. I was like, what do these idiots think the Earth is flat? Like, what? But then I looked into it and I was like, oh my God, is the Earth flat? You know, you have to, there's going to be a lot of things that I think are going to be really difficult to challenge, but I think it's fun too. Like that's what I went into. It was like, maybe it is, I don't know. Let's see, you know? And then in the end, I have to admit, I don't know. And I'm probably not going to know until if I get in a spaceship and fly out. And even then I might question it. So,
exactly. I come down to this one is as it relates to the flat Earth is like, at this point in my life, whether it's flat or sphere or something else, it doesn't matter.
Yes, my experience is the same either way.
So it's like there's an interest, like there's a part of me which is like, wow, this, because I've seen the videos and I'm like, I don't know why you're seeing why can you see Chicago from 60 miles away?
Or why doesn't their equation seem to work? And like, why are the flight paths so weird?
Right, exactly. And so and I'm like, I'm not willing to go down that rabbit hole because there are other places which are calling for my attention. And at this point, it does not seem to be something which I can justify, but it's certainly on my radar.
Well, and honestly, like we're saying, like it doesn't affect you, but there's other things that you can pay attention to and learn about that could affect you, you know?
Yeah.
And one of the things people say is like, well, if it's flat Earth, then it was hidden. And that's because people don't want us to know that we're such an amazingly beautiful creation of God. And I'm like, well, I already knew that.
Yeah.
Like whatever you want to call God, we are an amazingly beautiful creation that exists. Like that's just true for me. So I didn't really need a flat Earth to tell me that. what does seem interesting, or what I did notice, like by no means am I an expert of any of this Tartarian stuff. I've just seen a couple videos and I'm just reflecting what's coming through with me. From the few things which I have looked at, there seems to be some sort of support to flat Earth. Yes. And, you know, you could look at that in a couple different ways, but they do seem to be linked. And so that to me is, you know, I just have that, like, you know, with a little footnote off to the side. But so you cut out for a second. Were you saying that the mud flood Tartaria stuff seems to be connected to flat Earth in some way?
Yes. So from what I've seen in some of the videos, there seems to be some sort of complementary nature in these two different kind of areas of exploration. And
interesting.
And again, maybe I'm mistaken because I've only looked into this so not too deeply, but that's what I have seen in the few places which I have researched, and you know that it's kind of interesting. You know, it's if they're supporting each other, that could point to one thing or the other, but if they dovetail, that would be both of those stories will gain weight one way or the other. Like, you know, whether that means like they're both like ridiculously made CIA stories to like take people off down a different path, or they're like, no, this is the actual truth. And this is it. Our world, we have been lied to such a great degree. Like, you know, what's the quote? Like, you know, if you're going to tell a lie, tell a really, really big lie. Yeah. And like, that's what's happening. Like, I don't know, like, you know, the jury seems to be still out, but they seem to be linked.
I go back to like you're talking about the piano where you strike it and the other chords or the other strings vibrate too. And I go back to like when we're singing in groups, humans, our hearts start beating in sync. Yeah. Every human who's singing in the room at the same time has a synced up heart. And like there's no accepted scientific reason for that, but it's true. Right. So like there's beauty beyond what we are meant to, I think, understand. And
we're naturally synced up. Like, you know, like women, when they're together, their cycles sync up. Like men have to sync up in a certain way. Like that's what we do. And when we begin to see like it's not the exception, it's the rule, you're like, well, then what are we?
Yes. And I'm sure I'm sure it can connect out with nature too, right? Like it's not just with one another with humans. I'm sure it's with trees and animals and
I would say 100%.
right, yeah, like the river.
Literally, if someone were at the or holding the internal perspective, which would be like, you know what? I think that's ridiculous. Like at least to nature, like syncing up with nature. I think that's, you know, I'm open to that, but I'm not buying it, or I want some proof or something like that. Literally talk to plants for a month. Like talk to it lovingly.
Yes.
Talk to it. Doesn't even have to be like, you know, like gushingly lovingly.
No.
Like really be like,
hey,
like exactly.
You're pretty.
Like,
yeah.
and take care. And it will. My experience has shown that change like drastically. Yes. And when you see this firsthand, you know, it indicates like what is the nature of our relationship with this environment? Why do we link up like this?
Yeah.
Here's this other thing which I've been thinking about lately. So I don't know if I'm going to pronounce this correctly. I think it's pronounced psoas, PSOAPSOAS.
Yeah. Is this a muscle?
Yes.
Okay, I keep hearing about this muscle over and over again in my life, so it's really weird. So you got my attention.
Do you know where that muscle is?
It like wraps from the front of your kind of lower abdomen around to your lower back or something?
It's like kind of down like where your hips
area?
and femurs, where your hips and femurs meet, and then it attaches to the. And again, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a doctor, but and it connects to the lower spine, and it is the most internal muscle in the body. But this is the thing which is so interesting, to me at least.
Yeah.
So one of the things which makes human beings separate from all of the other beings that are on this planet, or at least in like, you know, material form that we could all agree we can see upon, is that we are in our resting position on our feet. Our spines are perpendicular to the plane of the earth.
Yes.
There's no one else has got that.
Whoa.
And so without like saying like this means that, just be like, all of these other elephants, giraffes, whatever, like their natural position, their spine is not perpendicular. Now, granted, the neck of a giraffe does, but it's not standing. An ape is on four in its natural position. Like we are the only ones that our natural way of being. And we also recognize us as more or less stewards of the environment. Because we have a capability to do so. If it were possums, then possums would be the steward of the environment. Right. We would know that because they would. But we are obviously that, and so we know that we have that relationship or that uniqueness, that we have that role on the earth, and we also know we are unique by this ability to stand straight up. The reason why we could stand straight up is this muscle.
Wow.
So then without getting into meaning, we're just like looking at what all of these things are. Like, like we seem to have a certain important relationship on the earth because we're able to do stuff which other beings on the earth are unable to do. And we know that part of it has to do with how we move. And it's my personal opinion that by having our spine the way it is, or our brain, it completely changes our consciousness. Like whatever animals experience is so uniquely different than what we experience, and has to do with just the way our structure is. You know, that's just my thoughts. I don't know. But then we go and we look at the muscle which causes it, and we know it's the most inner muscle in the body. And I can't remember who it was, but it was like some ancient people, but you know, how can you talk about the ancients after we talk about the Tartary and like maybe everything's fake? But let's just assume there's some truth to it. They said that this muscle was the seat of the soul.
What? So then what's
So again, like I'm not saying this in a way to like contradict anything else. I'm just looking at this in terms of like trying to understand different parts of what it means to be in our bodies. What are the different things in our bodies? What are their significance? How do we want to interact with it? You know, I don't know, but this is the stuff which I'm finding interesting. And I think we're moving, and like, it's exciting to people. Like we want to hear that, like, you know, and we want to feel good about being people. We want to feel good about the other people, and we want to go and express ourselves however is like natural to express ourselves. And you know, that's,
and we know that what we're being offered isn't it, you know, it's not enough. Like we get, even when you're totally caught up in it and you're like, all right, I'm going to college and I get this job and I have a wife and kids and I got my house and I'm here and I got my RV and I go on vacation and like, all right, is this it? Like, and then we have a midlife crisis or whatever. And we're like, well, I think we're aware at some level, no matter where we're at in this spectrum of things, that this isn't it.
well,
you know, we haven't arrived.
I would say so. And I think what we're seeing right now, particularly, you know, I'm what they would call Generation X.
Yeah.
And I've always thought that that was a really interesting name. Like I know the cultural story where that comes from, but it's stuck. And, you know, we're not baby boomers. We're not millennials. We're not the greatest generation. We're Generation X. And what is X? X is a variable. You solve for the X. You don't know what X is going to be. And this generation, Generation X, is really the transitional generation from like pre-personal computer and post-personal computer, because, or maybe cable TV, because we have in our actual experience within our nervous system life before this sort of stuff, and then we're young enough that we were able to integrate with it relatively easy. So we kind of have this, we bridge both ways. And a lot of what you just said about like who wants to go and no longer buy this sort of like, you know, make certain your 401k is this and get your, you know, this is your life. A lot of that is coming from as the Generation X is beginning to reach that position in society where, you know, I'll just use like the president as a metaphor, like where we will be of age to be the president. Like Bill Clinton was the first baby boomer president. That was a threshold that was crossed. At some point, there will be someone of this generation, assuming there are going to be more presidents, and assuming that it's not, and assuming that it's not going to be you know, bypassed to a younger generation. That's possible. But we're seeing this drive, and that's part of what that X is a question mark of people of this generation beginning to question what the culture was. And certainly that's trying to be influenced and driven, but then I think there's a truth to it. Like every time there is an upgrade to the system, like if you're a systems administrator and you're doing like a system-wide upgrade, there's a little bit of anxiety because you're like, you know, it could all just crash and I could destroy everything. So
it'll be impossible to figure out.
Every generation has been a system upgrade. And so this was a big system upgrade. And, you know, as we're coming into let's say the age of our maturity, that, you know, what are they going to do? And I think part of it, if you go and you look at what has been put in culture for this generation, particularly when they're young kids, like Scooby-Doo, like the Time Life unexplained mystery series. This predates you, but this is all part of like these cultural icons for this generation at key parts of their development, which is different than like one generation later when it went from like Nickelodeon to MTV to VH1. Like, you know, that was a way of capturing generations as they grow. We can see like there's this kind of like openness to well, one, like Scooby-Doo introduced an entire generation to like conspiracy. Like every Scooby-Doo was, hey, we think it's a ghost. And then it was a conspiracy. No, it wasn't a ghost. It was something else.
True. I never thought of it that way.
But that's what it is. It's like, that's the message. Like, I mean, there's so many messages, right? With Shaggy and Scooby. And, you know, what I'm intrigued about all of these things which you and I are talking about, and now's not the time to have this conversation because, you know, we've been talking, it seems like, for a while, and this
I think a couple hours.
Has it been a couple hours?
Wow. I think almost. Yeah, we're coming up on 2 hours.
All right. Well, so
we're good at that.
We're good at, yeah. Gemini moon. Yeah. So what may be happening, or at least the setting of this stage is possible, is as this generation is reaching a certain level of wisdom or maturity, and because they are a little bit more open and more skeptical, just from the cultural training, as these ideas are beginning to filter out, you know, Tartary or any of this, like there's a fertile ground. There's a fertile ground for ideas to then take hold in real people, to do real things, to investigate, to, like, you know, what are we going to do in this environment, you know? So I find that very, very optimistic, and it's,
Yeah.
yes.
I think that also, and maybe this connects with it, is that we also in that generation, I think, have that was grunge not part of Generation X? Because I feel like we also have this bit of like our willingness to say, you know, well, fuck the system then, or like leave that behind, like let go of old shit that isn't working anymore. And so maybe that'll come in really handy for the moments that you're just describing as well.
You're absolutely right. I mean, that's probably grunge probably hit in 94. And so if we're thinking about people born in the early 70s, you know, that's like, you know, early 20s, you know, people in their late teens, and really those who are a little bit younger, born in the later 70s, you know, that's going to hit them right when they're naturally going through a rebellious phase. So that energy is going to hit them. So, I mean, if you want to go and look at how to influence culture, how to influence a group of people, is you time what's naturally, you don't try to force anything against its natural unfolding. You just try to influence the natural unfolding. So if there is going to be a certain time in life where there is going to be more rebellion, such as like in the teenage years, then you offer an outlet for that rebelliousness. So it has a natural place to go. And so, like, yeah, that lines up perfectly. I'm not saying that grunge was that. Right. It definitely came out at that time, and it definitely was, it was sucked into the system. Yeah. It was sucked into the system, but yeah, that's an interesting point. That's a good point.
It's like you're making me think of those trees that you can, like, you know, their trunks, you can like weave them together. It's like they're already going to grow, but you kind of train them to like do it in a certain way and make this pattern.
That's what people who control culture do.
Yeah, they're really good at it too. But we're really good at decoding it and maybe hopefully diverting, you know, in our own way.
I agree also. And, you know, I like to always go back to, like you said, like you could go higher and higher, higher, deeper and deeper and deeper. At the highest level, it's all like whatever it is, there can only be one it. Yes. There's not two its, there's one it. And at the highest level, there's
no definition to anything. It's all just going to be a whatever that is.
There's no opposition, is what I mean.
Yeah. Yeah. So, all right, so let's nice ending point.
Yeah.
So do you want to give people any final words of wisdom for to wrap things up with, or advice?
I mean, I don't know if I got words of wisdom or advice, but I would definitely say, like, be kind to yourself, be kind to your environment, be kind to people, be as honest with yourself as you can be, and, you know, and express yourself. Like, you know, we're all artists, whatever that may mean. Like, find cool ways so that people can go see you. You know, I think I'm a fan of that. I'd recommend, if anyone kind of likes what I'm saying, check out my Instagram page. That's Susquehanna Alchemy, because I'm putting out a lot of interesting art, and I like to share that. That's a little bit more personal. And something I want to talk to you about afterwards is I have some ideas about changing a Patreon model, an economic model, and that should be coming down the chute sometime soon as well. And also, you could always go to susquehannaalchemy.com or YouTube at Susquehanna Alchemy to see like videos on the Susquehanna mystery, on how a 400-year magical ritual has been done, on the primary spirit of the earth to introduce globalism, information technology and wire-based distribution of electricity.
Excellent, which ties back to Tartary as well.
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
Definitely. I love your Instagram page too, because it's your work, it's your private personal work, but it's also your you find information and share it there as well, which I think is cool way to use Instagram.
Yeah, I try to use it in like in some ways it's a little bit clunky because it's not always on point, but the point is like it's an expression of my world. And that's the point. And so like sometimes the art, sometimes it's like the revealing of this information. Sometimes it's astrology. And so it's turned out to be a really enjoyable medium for me.
Well, and that you're expressing yourself like you were recommending that other people do. And I think that's a really cool way to put it, because the more you're, interacting with other people in whatever way it is, or offering something for them to interact with, like that's how we all develop through all of this. Like we need each other as mirrors to bounce off of in order to keep going further with things. So
yeah,
that's awesome. All right. And you told people where to find you, and we're going to maybe look into alternatives to Patreon, which would be awesome, because I personally hate even being on there when they're doing so much censorship for no reason. I hate censorship in all forms, honestly. So I'm excited about that. So anyway, fellow travelers of the path, it is a beautiful thing, and this has been your analog, electric, concentric dose of wisdom, according to Michael Wann. Michael, thank you so much for being here again. It's awesome to talk to you.
Thank you for having me. It was a real pleasure.
Great. Thank you to all of you listening also from your little pockets of the world. I hope you are ever carving out a more clear vision of your space and place, and that it is ever enlightening you as your true self and your true purpose in the world, even and especially in the moments that are hardest in life. Keep rocking your badass ways and questioning everything. And as always, travel well, aim for balance, and always look inside first.